My neighbor told me I could leave any time I wanted, but the way she looked at me made it impossible to move. That evening, I wasn't planning on staying long. I had only stepped out to bring in the mail when I noticed her standing at her front door, her silhouette framed by the soft, golden light spilling from inside. She smiled at me, a smile that carried both ease and a hint of something deeper, and before I could think of a polite excuse, she tilted her head and asked, "Why don't you come in for a bit?" Her house was familiar from the outside, but stepping through her doorway felt strangely intimate. The air carried a subtle sweetness, vanilla and something floral, maybe lavender. The kind of scent that makes a space feel like it remembers you, even if you've only just arrived. Her living room was cozy but lived in, with stacks of books by the coffee table, a throw blanket draped carelessly over the couch. It didn't feel staged, it felt real, like her. She moved with quiet confidence, barefoot on the wooden floor, a loose sweater falling gracefully over her shoulders. She wasn't trying to impress, yet every gesture had a natural elegance that drew my eyes without effort. When she laughed at something I said, it wasn't loud, but it wrapped around me in a way that made me want to say more, just to hear it again. I sat on the edge of her couch, trying not to seem too aware of how close I was to her world. She poured 2 glasses of wine, the glass cool against my fingers as she handed one to me. Our fingers brushed briefly, so brief it could have been accidental, yet the warmth of that touch stayed far longer than it should have. We talked about nothing in particular at first, the weather, neighbors, the small rhythms of the week. But beneath the surface, I felt an unspoken current. Her eyes didn't just look at me, they lingered, as though searching for something she couldn't name. And in those pauses between words, I sensed a loneliness she carried quietly, tucked behind her smile. Every detail seemed amplified, the ticking of the clock on the wall, the way the fabric of the couch pressed against my palm, the faint creak of the wood when she shifted her weight. It wasn't the setting that mattered, though. It was the awareness of being there, with her, in a space that belonged entirely to her. I realized then that I wasn't just a visitor. She had let me see her in a way that felt rare, comfortable, unguarded, yet with edges of something unsaid. That first evening, nothing dramatic happened. And yet, when her gaze lingered a second too long, when her laugh softened into a sigh, I felt something begin. It wasn't about the invitation itself. It was about how she made me feel once I stepped inside, like the simplest choice in the world had opened a door to something neither of us could fully ignore. The first glass of wine was nearly finished when I realized how easily the minutes had slipped by. Conversation flowed smoother than I expected, her words drawing me in as though we'd known each other longer than a handful of polite greetings exchanged across the driveway. She leaned against the doorframe now, arms folded loosely, watching me with an expression that was equal parts amusement and something harder to define. When I shifted as if to stand, intending to thank her and head home, she tilted her head, lips curving into a sly smile. "Try to leave," she said softly, almost playful, though her tone carried a quiet weight. "I dare you!" The words hung in the air, lighter than a laugh but heavier than a joke. For a second, I wasn't sure how to respond. The ticking of the clock grew louder, each second echoing in the silence between us. Her gaze held steady, not challenging in a harsh way, but in a way that felt like she was asking if I could resist something she already knew I didn't want to. I laughed lightly, trying to diffuse the sudden tension, but my voice betrayed me with its slight unsteadiness. "That sounds like a trap," I murmured. Her smile deepened, though she didn't move. "Maybe it is. But do you really want to go?" There was no teasing lilt in her voice this time. Just calm certainty, as though she had caught on to the conflict I was carrying inside, the part of me that knew staying was a risk, and the part that already knew I wasn't walking out that door. I pretended to glance toward the exit, but my body didn't follow. My feet stayed rooted to the floor, my hand never reached for my jacket. I could feel her eyes trace every hesitation, and when our gazes met again, I swear she saw right through the performance. She pushed gently away from the doorframe and crossed the room with slow, deliberate steps. Her presence filled the space without effort. The faint brush of her sweater sleeve passed close as she walked by, and my chest tightened in that small, electric nearness. She stopped just beside me, close enough that I caught the soft scent of her perfume again, floral with something darker beneath. "See?" she whispered, her voice almost conspiratorial, as if we were sharing a secret. "I don't think you want to." Her words were light, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of vulnerability. It wasn't only a dare, it was an invitation, a test to see if I felt what she felt. My pulse quickened, not from fear but from the weight of what lingered unspoken between us. I stayed seated, my glass resting untouched in my hand, my thoughts caught in the gravity of her presence. The air felt heavier, warmer, as though the walls themselves were leaning in, waiting to see if I'd move. And in that moment, the truth was undeniable. I wasn't resisting. I shifted in my seat, pretending again that I might stand, just to test myself against her dare. But as I moved, her hand reached out, lightly, almost absent-mindedly, and brushed against my wrist. It was the smallest touch, but it stilled me completely. Her fingers didn't tighten, didn't hold me there, yet the warmth of her skin was enough to pin me more firmly than if she had locked the door. The room went quiet in a way I hadn't noticed before. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the muffled sounds of distant traffic, suddenly they all faded beneath the silence stretching between us. Her hand lingered, not gripping, just resting, as though she was giving me the chance to pull away if I wanted to. I didn't. Her eyes found mine, steady but searching, and in them I caught something fragile, something almost hidden. For all her playful confidence, there was a vulnerability behind her gaze. Like this moment wasn't only about daring me to stay, but about risking herself and letting me see the truth she usually kept tucked away. Seconds slipped by, though they felt stretched and endless. My pulse was loud in my chest, and I could see the faint rhythm of hers in the rise and fall of her shoulders. She drew in a slow breath, the kind that trembles ever so slightly when someone is trying to appear composed. I swallowed, aware of how close we sat now. The couch seemed smaller than before, the air thicker, warmer. I wanted to say something, anything to ease the weight of the moment, but no words came. Instead, I simply let her hand remain where it was, feeling the gentle press of her fingers against my skin. It was astonishing how much could be said in silence. Her touch wasn't just a gesture, it was a confession. And the way I let it stay, the way I leaned subtly closer rather than away, was mine in return. Her lips parted as if to speak, but nothing came. She only exhaled softly, her breath brushing the space between us. I could sense the careful battle inside her, a woman so used to appearing in control, now standing at the edge of revealing something far more tender. I realized then that this wasn't just a game or a test of will. It was a moment of choice, hers and mine. The choice to acknowledge what was happening, or to look away and pretend it wasn't there. I didn't move. Neither did she. And in that long, unbroken pause, we both understood something had shifted. Her fingers finally slipped away, not hurried, but deliberate, leaving a faint trail of warmth on my skin. The absence of her touch was almost louder than the touch itself. And yet, even without it, I remained exactly where I was, anchored by the pull of something unspoken, something neither of us could resist naming much longer. We didn't speak for a long moment after her hand slipped away. The silence wasn't empty, it was thick, charged, filled with everything neither of us had dared to put into words. When she finally leaned back into the couch, her shoulders seemed to soften, like she'd surrendered to the gravity between us. I followed, settling closer than before, close enough that I could sense her warmth even without her touch. Her eyes flickered toward me, and then away, as if she wasn't sure how much she wanted me to see. "You know," she began quietly, her voice lower now, steadier. "People always think they know me. They see what they want to see. They don't usually ask what's underneath." Her tone was casual on the surface, but the weight beneath it pulled at me. I waited, not pushing, letting her decide how much to give. She exhaled through a faint laugh, though there was no amusement in it. "I've been admired, I suppose. Respected. Even envied sometimes. But being noticed isn't the same as being known. And it's exhausting, always carrying that." Her eyes lingered on her glass, fingertips tracing the rim absently. Her words struck something in me. I hadn't thought much about what her life looked like from the inside. From across the street, she'd always seemed so composed, so certain. But here, now, there was no armor. Just honesty. I set my glass down, needing my hands free, unsure if I would reach for hers but knowing I had to be open. I get that more than I can explain, I admitted softly. I've always felt like I'm still figuring out where I belong. People assume I've got time, that it doesn't matter yet. But it matters to me. She lifted her gaze, and for the first time, I felt it land on me with nothing in the way. No teasing, no careful composure, just clear, steady attention. The silence between us turned softer, fuller, no longer sharp with hesitation. You make it sound simple, she said, almost like an observation to herself. But you see more than most. Her words lingered, stirring something in me I couldn't ignore. I wanted to answer, but my voice caught, and instead I just held her gaze. That seemed to be enough. The distance between us seemed smaller by the second. Her shoulder brushed mine when she shifted slightly, and she didn't move away. The faint scent of her perfume reached me again, wrapping around the moment. She let out a quiet sigh, the kind that comes when someone has finally set down a burden, even if only for a moment. It feels easier with you, she admitted. My chest tightened at the confession. I wanted to tell her I felt the same, that whatever pull I'd been resisting was more than attraction, it was recognition. But the words stayed unspoken, and instead, I let my closeness, my silence, answer for me. For the first time that night, we weren't just talking. We were seeing each other. Her confession, "It feels easier with you," still echoed between us when her hand moved again, almost unconsciously. At first, it rested on the cushion between us, fingers tapping lightly as though searching for something to hold onto. Then, slowly, those same fingers shifted, brushing against the edge of my knee. It wasn't a bold gesture. If anything, it was tentative testing. But the effect it had on me was immediate. My whole body seemed to focus on that single point of contact. The warmth of her touch bled through fabric, steady and deliberate, grounding me in the present moment. I didn't move away. Instead, I let the weight of her hand remain, as if answering her silent question without words. My chest tightened, not from nerves this time, but from a realization, she wasn't simply daring me anymore. She was letting me in, piece by piece, in the only way she knew how. Her eyes flicked to mine briefly, then fell again, as though she hadn't meant for me to notice. But I noticed everything, the way her breath caught, the faint parting of her lips, the tension in her shoulders that gave her away. She leaned slightly, her shoulder brushing mine. The contact was fleeting, accidental in appearance, yet I felt it all the same. Her sweater was soft against my skin, and beneath that soft fabric, the warmth of her presence radiated. The air shifted, thickened, carrying the faint notes of her perfume. A floral sweetness layered over something deeper, something richer. It was a scent that clung to memory, that made me want to lean closer just to breathe it in again. My heart beat faster, not from fear, but from the closeness itself, the way every inch between us seemed to shrink by the second. The room felt smaller too, like the walls had drawn in, leaving only this narrow space where we existed side by side. Her hand pressed slightly firmer against my knee, as though settling into place. Then, almost as if she caught herself, she pulled it back, her fingers retreating to rest in her lap. The absence was sharp, and I found myself wishing she hadn't let go. But then, just as quickly, her hand drifted back, reclaiming its place. This time, she didn't hesitate. Her touch lingered, certain, quiet but undeniable. I turned my head, meeting her eyes, and the silence between us grew louder than words. She smiled faintly, just a curve of her lips, fragile but sincere. "Too close?" she asked softly, though her voice held no real intention of pulling away. I shook my head, the words caught in my throat. My silence was enough. We sat there, the edges of our shoulders brushing, her hand steady on my knee, the air around us humming with something unspoken. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't rushed. It was simply near. Near enough to feel, near enough to ache, near enough that leaving was no longer a thought in my mind. Her hand lingered on my knee, steady now, no longer tentative. The quiet confidence in that touch mirrored the smile curving at her lips, a smile that held both certainty and question. She tilted her head slightly, studying me, her gaze deeper than any words she might have spoken. Then, almost in a whisper, her voice broke the silence. "Still think you can walk away?" It wasn't playful this time. Not teasing, not a challenge. It was softer, intimate, like a truth she already knew but needed me to admit. The question hung in the air, and my mind raced through the possibilities. I could stand, force myself to the door, pretend this was only a neighborly evening that had stretched too long. Or I could stay, acknowledging the pull that had been quietly shaping every moment since I stepped into her home. My eyes drifted to the door, just for a second. It felt miles away. My body didn't move, my feet heavy as though rooted to the floor. And when I looked back at her, her eyes held me there, eyes that were strong, yes, but threaded with something else. A quiet pleading. A hope she was too careful to say aloud. The way she looked at me then wasn't the way someone flirts. It was the way someone risks. I realized my choice wasn't about whether I could leave. It was about whether I wanted to. The truth struck me with startling clarity. I didn't. I shifted slightly closer, the space between us narrowing until our shoulders touched fully. Her breath caught, just a tiny hitch, but enough to tell me she felt it too. She didn't move away. If anything, she leaned into it, her warmth seeping through the thin barrier of fabric between us. Her smile softened, losing its edge, becoming something gentler. "I knew it," she whispered, almost to herself. But even as she said it, I could see the uncertainty flicker again, a fragile light in her expression. Beneath her confidence was the fear of being wrong, of giving too much away. I wanted to ease that fear. To let her know she hadn't misread me, that she wasn't alone in this. I turned slightly toward her, enough that our knees brushed. My hand hovered for a moment, then settled carefully over hers, covering it where it still rested on me. Her fingers tightened instantly, curling into mine with a small but deliberate squeeze. It wasn't dramatic, but it was everything. A choice made together, in silence. The room seemed to exhale with us. The ticking clock that had once felt sharp now melted into the background, a steady rhythm instead of a reminder. She looked at me then, not smiling, not speaking, just looking, as if memorizing the certainty in my face. And in that look I knew I wasn't going anywhere. I didn't move toward the door. I didn't even glance at it again. The choice had already been made, not in some sudden rush of impulse, but in the quiet weight of everything we'd shared that evening. I stayed because I wanted to, not because she dared me, not because I felt trapped, but because leaving would have meant walking away from something I already knew I couldn't replace. Her shoulders softened, as though she'd been holding her breath for too long. For the first time that night, she seemed to let herself believe I was really there with her, not halfway out the door in my mind. She leaned in gently, closing the last of the space between us, and rested her head against my chest. The contact was simple, yet it unraveled me. Her cheek pressed lightly against me, her hair brushing my chin, carrying that familiar, delicate fragrance I'd noticed from the start. My arm lifted almost instinctively, settling around her shoulders. The sweater she wore was soft beneath my hand, and beneath that, I could feel the steady warmth of her body, the quiet rhythm of her breathing. For a while neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, it was warm, calm, full of something that didn't need to be named. The ticking clock that had once felt like a reminder of time slipping away now seemed like a soft lullaby, marking each second we allowed ourselves to simply be. She shifted slightly, curling closer, and I felt the faintest sigh escape her lips, carried into me where her head rested. It wasn't a sigh of weariness, it was relief. The kind that comes when the weight you've carried alone finally finds a place to rest. I held her a little tighter, not to keep her there, but to reassure her that I wanted her there. That she didn't have to second-guess it. She glanced up at me briefly, her eyes shining not with the playful challenge I'd seen earlier, but with something softer, something grateful, vulnerable, almost fragile. You stay, she whispered. The words weren't a statement of victory, but of wonder. As though she hadn't truly expected it, as though part of her had braced for the sound of the door closing behind me. I did, I answered quietly, my voice steady even though my heart beat faster than I could control. She smiled then, a real smile, free of guarded edges. It was small, but it was enough to fill the entire room. We stayed like that for a long time, her head against my chest, my arm around her, the world outside her walls fading into irrelevance. No grand declarations were needed, no promises made too soon. Just presence. Just closeness. Just the quiet certainty that, for tonight at least, neither of us had to face our loneliness alone. And in that silence, in that nearness, I understood, the dare was never about leaving. It was about discovering why I would choose to stay.